Corporate learning isn't really working, and I think a lot of you have an intuitive sense of that. It's poorly motivated, the tools are quite crude, and you don't really measure efficacy. You might measure performance, but not efficacy. Did it work? So why? Why care about this? Oxford carried out a study, Workforce 2020, that showed quite clearly that a top concern of most employees is, in fact, their learning, their sort of risk of becoming obsolete over the very short term. I'm not talking about 10 years on, I'm not talking about 15 years on, I'm talking about 3 years from now, 2 years from now, a year from now. They're quite worried about that. 41% of respondents from North America said, I think I'm going to be obsolete in less than 3 years. 40% of people who responded to the survey altogether said, my company isn't doing anything for me. And I'm not learning there. I don't feel supported by my organization and feel like I can keep up. So let's talk about motivation. You know this guy, Tony Robbins, right? Well-known corporate consultant, self-help guru, lots of CEOs use his guidance and wisdom to imagine the ways in which they can be better leaders. But I guarantee you that he's not going to help you equip, enlist, right, engage your workforce to build the next stage of your company, right? The one that's going to be able to respond to all the tech disruption, the one that people are talking about themselves being inside of and worried about. This is a graph that shows the average tenure of a CEO at an S&P 500 company. It's been going down precipitously since the 70s. Not uncoincidentally, the average lifespan of a company on the S&P 500 has also been going down in the same time period. It's quite short now, right? And in the top companies in the S&P 500, which are all tech companies, by the way, all the top 10, the average tenure of an employee is also dropping. The most extreme example is Facebook. Average tenure, less than a year. That's extreme. But it still indicates something, right? We should be worried about talented people leaving the organization, particularly if they don't feel like they're getting what they need. You'll have seen something that looks like this, no doubt. This shows the sort of progress of technology over time. This graph demonstrates how technology computing power is sort of approaching the same capacity as the human brain. The singularity point is in 2020. That's very, very close to now. And that's making people really nervous, right? So, why is this all coming to a head? What is it that you're going to do? How are you going to respond? Your time is short, getting shorter all the time, right? Your employees are going to have to learn. They're going to have to learn fast, right? You're going to have to learn fast. Everybody's going to have to keep up. But I contend it's not just about speed. It's about doing it differently, right? Doing it together and really changing your approach to learning in the corporate environment. Okay. Who feels like this when they do an online training course or module at work, right? This probably describes how you look or how you feel when you're doing some training in the work environment. This is not everybody. I'm overly generalizing, of course. But this can be how it feels to your employees. And, workforce training does get a reputation for being pedantic, for being dull, for being actually a waste of time, right? I've done it. I did it for compliance reasons, or I took that course because I got an incentive from work to take it, right? I got a little boost in pay, or had some program that I was put in to take that course. But it's not engaging, and it's not engaging in the way that I think is most important. A competence in a subject area is important. Don't get me wrong about that. But it's not the limit of what you can do with corporate training, right? People use social networks to learn. Think about that for a second. In the environment you're in right now, outside talking with people, engaging with our speakers, engaging with each other, You're looking for successful behaviors to mimic. You learn from your cohort, and so do all of your employees. They build social networks, and it's how they learn how to be successful in the work environment. We don't do any of that in online, corporate, in-person learning, none of it, right? So we don't mimic the way that people learn in the learning that we deliver to them. Doesn't happen. People use that social sort of context, the contextual factors that make up their social network to figure out what it is they have to learn and when and how. Without the social glue, in fact, learning that happens in those other learning contexts, it actually erodes. It goes away. It doesn't stick, right? It's not just that it's not like the learning that they'd like to be doing. It doesn't stay. It doesn't stick with them. So I actually also work at MIT in a lab and do some research with some of the instructors and researchers there. And so we decided that we needed to carry out some experiments, right? How do you learn? In a research context, you experiment, you gather data, and then you figure out, did that help me or not? Okay, so we carried a few out in the connection science group at the Media Lab at MIT. And we did it in a couple different ways. We wanted to study online. Obviously, that's a hot area of development and learning. But we also wanted to study in person. We wanted to study blended learning, where you combine in-person and online experiences. And we wanted to also study lots of different kinds of tools. Proximity sensors, right? How close you are to other people, how you gather, not just gathering online, but gathering in person and then combining all that data to see what we could learn. So we studied lots of different things. In some cases, we partnered with people. In some cases, we actually developed our own courses, and then we put some, learning on top of, some research on top of that. Here's one such conclusion. So in Science Magazine, they published a paper called Strength of Strongest Ties, and the diagram here shows groups of 4 who are working together. Actually, it's in a university here in Copenhagen. The groups of 4 are the gray blobs, and the color, the darkness of it, shows their performance, how well they did on both individual and group activities. The blue lines, right, the little arcs between those blobs, that shows their social connections, the ways that they related to one another in a non-restrictive and non-structured sense. What this actually showed definitively was that the effect of social networks on productivity, right, and achievement, being able to do the work and do it well, eclipsed all other factors that were measured. Raw intelligence, previous performance, other kinds of training exercises, all other factors. Social networks, like the ones indicated in blue, were the strongest factor. And not only were they correlated, they're actually predictive, right? So it wasn't just that they could say, oh, well, they're related to one another. You could predict that future teams and configurations of people doing the exercises were going to do well based on their social strength, the strength of their ties. Okay, so we also tried some intervention feedback loops. This is another technique that we were interested in understanding. And what would happen if we gave people immediate feedback while they were doing a learning exercise? How would that affect them? Could they learn from that? Could that be a tool to help people understand how to interact more successfully, better patterns? So here you see a video conference, right? Typical Google Hangout, or pick your favorite tool, doesn't really matter, right? But we slapped that intervention up there, that graph that shows the visual feel or the health of the conversation. And we started with the premise that if you're all talking evenly, that's a healthy conversation. So what we found was, as we implemented this intervention over several weeks, people became more equalized in their talking with one another. The intervention helped them develop self-awareness, right? And stopped the people who were totally over-dominating the conversation and helped them become more balanced with their other people in the class. We also did some other experiments, and one of the interesting findings I'll just share with you is that people were really motivated by themselves. And you think to yourself, well, of course they're motivated by themselves. That's how people are, right? But what I mean by that is that even with all this structured engagement they were giving people to be a part of, people really also wanted to engage in another context. And so in an online course that we offered in financial technologies, right, which is now being offered by Oxford Said, we found that people felt compelled to meet in regional, in-person meetings. They self-organized to bring their online experience into an in-person experience. And some of those connections are still alive today. They're still meeting many months after the course is over. So social is important. Here's a picture of a social graph. This is actually people who are following each other on Twitter. One of the findings that you can get from some of these social graphs is who follows who and who thinks who is important. In this graph, it shows that Deepak Chopra follows Demi Moore for some reason. Who knows? But you can find surprising facts out of any kind of social graph. It's a trivial example, but it really talks about, how you can measure social interaction and what you might find out. If you don't measure it, you won't find anything out. Okay. So let's take a look at some studies. This is a famous study, Bell Labs STARS study. They interviewed managers and engineers, and they asked them to pick the top performance, the star performers of the organization. And what they found was that managers picked quickly, they drove to consensus quickly, and they had a very clear list of people from this division who were the top performers. Engineers, on the other hand, were totally disparate in their choices. And they picked totally different people, and their overlap was about 45 to 50%. So what does this say? Well, in most organizations, what it says is that managers and engineers and workers value different things. But in this case, what they specifically valued, managers, was organizational savvy and the ability for somebody to keep their manager up to speed. Engineers, on the other hand, identified quickly what they valued: cooperation, teamwork, willingness to help out, engage in complex and really critical problems of the organization, to work together, to collaborate, really important to them, right? That was what the study found, among other things. So what this points to is something we call in sports metrics, for anybody who follows sports of one kind or another, something called the player credit attribution problem. This is a picture of Liverpool in the Merseyside Derby last year. They won against crosstown rivals Everton. I'm a Liverpool fan. That's why this slide is up here. I could have put anything, but I happen to be a Liverpool fan. And what this really points up is that in sports metrics today, right, they measure everything. Literally everything, anything you can think of. And the reason they're trying to do that, not just for betting, although that is one of the motivations, but in fact to find out what that magic combination is that makes a team successful. It's not just the goal scorer, Divock Origi, who's shown here, or the assist, which was Philippe Coutinho, right? It's all the people. And what is it about all the people? Is it the fact that they have a really strong defense? And what aspects of the defense, right? So this is sabermetrics for football, right? And there's literally no end to the data being collected, right? So could you do sabermetrics for work? I mean, this is optimization at the extreme, right? You're trying to tune that engine in a really, really detailed and fine way. But even at a gross level, right, we don't measure a lot of the things that actually count in an organization. We don't measure them. We won't even try. So here's your org chart, or something like it, totally simplistic version, but it takes the point, right? You have hierarchies, people who report to other people. You have people who are working cross-functionally to make products and services, and that's an important way in which you measure their performance. Are they reporting up to their manager, right? Do they have organizational savvy, right? It's one of the performance measures. But the thing we don't measure is this. We never measure that. And that social graph, that's the way a lot of work gets done. It gets done this way. People reach out to their network, right? They find out how to work in this environment. And we just don't know about it because we're not really looking at it. And it's really important. So how do you do this? Well, that's why I started Riff Learning. I was very interested in this problem. I've been interested in this problem for the entire time that I've been a teacher, which is since I got out of college. And I think that one of the things that's going to be exciting about the next 10 to 15 years inside of organizations, inside of the corporations that you all are the executive management of, is in fact learning how to both harness the strength, the energy, right, the tech savvy of that up and coming group of employees, and marry it with the expertise, the maturity of the people who are there. This whole conference has been about people. And nobody's more important in your organization than the people who work there. Yes, your customers are important, don't get me wrong. But this is a really interesting field, and is one of the reasons why I got motivated to start Riff. So I don't think this is a foot race. We're talking about acceleration, right? Everything's moving very, very quickly. But I think it's really more of an engine tuning exercise, right? What is it that's going to help you and help your whole employees, the whole body of your employees, to really get the best out of them? And I contend that it's going to be about social learning. It's going to be about changing the way that we engage our employees in the future that's coming at them just as fast as it's coming at you, and the way that you perceive that. So the goal, make workplace learning rigorous, meaningful, relevant, and many of those things already exist in your corporate learning environments, but also connected, right? Connect to the people around you to learn more. I think this is going to be how your companies grow, evolve, and change with all of the different changes that are coming at you. Thank you very much. What a great audience.